Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down those unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness, hopefully without getting hurt. Because today, our guest, Elizabeth Lecerf, joining us from Calgary. And Elizabeth is here to talk to us about safety. Although offline, I did ask you, do you ever get tired of talking about safety? And you said, I don't necessarily get tired of talking about it, but there's a lot of stuff that people need to know. And you're the founder of SafetyComply, and you are on a journey to make the world a safer place. Very excited to have you here and chat with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
For listeners that don't know who you are, who is Elizabeth, and what the heck is SafetyComply?
Yeah, so I'm a health and safety professional in Alberta, but I've worked in companies in a variety of provinces as well. And I started in specific construction industry and trades. I moved into a general contracting company where I interacted with a larger variety of trades. And SafetyComply was born out of the experience of watching and working with smaller trades and companies have big company barriers to meet and just struggle to meet them. They're really good at what they do. They're great with their hands. They're great in their technical skills. But in order to do those things, they're just coming up across more and more documentation and barrier and just frustration. And I just saw the stress that caused. And so SafetyComply was wanting to help those companies, those business owners be able to be successful by taking away that stress and doing the thing that I'm good at. So that was the inspiration.
One of the things that comes up with safety a lot, and you mentioned that, especially with smaller companies, safety is often people preach safety, but when it comes to, profitability, speed, meeting schedules, logistics, safety ends up, as much as people talk about being safe, it falls to the bottom of the ladder for a lot of small businesses because they do see it as being a barrier. There's kind of this mentality of, we don't want to take the time to tie off and set up scaffolding, and we don't have the budget for that. It's just we need to move quickly. We need to be agile, and we don't have time to do, to go through full training regiments of to make sure that people are safe, because time is money. And so safety ends up really falling to the bottom of the pile of priorities pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Whereas I've worked with large construction companies in the past, and safety very much you are required to every single day log your activities, what's coming up. We do a pre-job safety inspection and an assessment on any new task that comes up. We are 100% tied off, 100% compliant 100% of the time. Whereas with small businesses, that can often be a barrier because they're, for all the reasons I listed, they need to be agile. But are you finding that? Do you agree that is the case with a lot of small businesses that you talk to, or what is generally the pushback and the story that you're getting from small businesses?
I think that's maybe the forward-facing story, the surface level story is that safety takes a lot of time and safety takes a lot of money to implement and to apply. But I think the reality behind that is more so, I don't know what I need to do. And the thought of all of it is overwhelming at that smaller business level, because they see, the bigger companies, the bigger construction companies, the larger projects, and they have a lot of resources and they have that forward facing, be like, this is all the things that we do. And so as a smaller business, when you see that, it's not so much that it's I don't have the time to do any safety. It's that I actually don't know what I need to be doing. So as a result, it's all just overwhelming. So it's still there. The need is still there. I think it just comes with a lot of unknown and frustration and a bit of fear.
And that's a great point, right? If you're a smaller business, you're getting into it, you don't really know what you don't know, right? You have
Hmm.
to take the time to understand, WorkSafe here, in BC, WorkSafe BC or WCB, like to understand all of the criteria that you have. So anytime that there's a question that comes up, it's well, I mean, now it's sort of chat GPT. It's like, hey, what do I, do in this situation? What do you recommend? But a lot of people don't have a health and safety plan. I could guarantee probably 99% of small businesses, if I asked and said, hey, can you show me your health and safety plan? They probably don't have one. And if they do
Hmm.
have one, it's probably something that it's pretty generic and it's never been revisited, not in, a number of years. And it ends up just being a binder in a drawer somewhere or in a series of documents in a folder online that never gets reviewed.
Yeah, that's very common. It's the dusted off the shelf or oh yeah, we wrote that once or we had it. And so I mentioned something that I try to implement is what I call functional safety. So there's a difference between like we have these documents written, but like nobody knows what they are or what we're doing versus a functional safety where we've actually taken our safety program and we've implemented it and it's integrated into our operations. So versus that alternative where you're saying it gets pushed to the bottom of the list, it's not as much of a priority, which I totally understand. So by taking it in a way that's like connects it to operations, it prevents that from happening, but it also removes the barrier of like, oh, we got to stop and do this, or that's another thing we have to do. So that's how I try to like mitigate that because it's very common. Again, it's so much content to take in at one time.
Mm,
It's like if you sat down for your driver's test and tried to read the entire provincial traffic safety book, right? Like
yeah.
at one go. It's a lot and to try to remember it all and know all the different dynamics to it. But just like traffic safety, I don't get to be pulled over and say, "Oh, sorry, officer, I didn't know about that." So like I'm free and clear, right? I
Yeah.
still have to follow the things that I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Sorry. Like
it's a similar analogy.
I know the speed signs say 60, but I just felt like 80 made sense and I didn't really pay attention to that. I thought it was more of a precaution than a rule.
Suggestion.
Yeah, more of a
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah.
When you say being able to functionally take safety and integrate it into production and what do you mean by that exactly? Can you give us
Mhm.
an example of something tangible as far as how can we get it from that textbook into the field just so that the company is and the culture is breathing it, living it, sealing it, feeling it in real time, even though maybe they
Mhm.
don't know that they're doing it, but it's being followed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the first things that I encourage a company to do is say like, what are we doing really well? Like not safety, just in general. What do we do really well at operationally, in our team, for our clients, with our product, whatever it is. Like find something that you do really well. And an example that I use often, especially for companies that serve like a consumer-based client, is like communicating with the client, like showing them, look at the work that we did, providing them whether it's pictures or updates or emails. Often that's something that's like we're really good at that or we regularly do that. Well, if we take that practice, that routine that we're already in, and then we add on to it just a little bit, like, okay, I left the site at the end of the day. Yep, everything was locked up, but also the equipment was put away properly. There wasn't any incidents. The chemicals are stored. Like, that's sort of that same idea of like showing to that client, showing to that customer that we're doing a good job, but we're adding in a few things that are like essentially a safety check. And
Mm,
so by kind of finding those opportunities to essentially habit stack, we can start integrating it without even really being like, you have to stop and do a safety form at the end of the day. Because as soon as you say it that way, it's like, whoa, my God, it's so annoying and it's frustrating. But if there's something we're already doing, let's just add a little bit to it in a way that it's not going to disrupt our regular routine.
yeah, and that's great because we as a company take progress photos. We're really good at it. I love the example that you set there. We take photos of progress for customers so they can see what's happening. It all gets updated into our CRM system. It's for them to uh, be able to access in the future if they need to find anything. It gives us good reference point of how production is moving along. But pretty simple to, make one of those 5 photos a day safety related, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, just noted that all ladders are tied off, right? They're all, or like you said, all chemicals are put away, or floor protection is down, and we don't have to worry about this. Doors are locked, ladders are down, uh, windows are closed off, something along those lines. Is that kind of
Mm-hmm.
what you're getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. You got it. So it's still asking like along the same lines of questions, but now we're just bringing that attention to some different items that the client will care about. Like essentially they're gonna be like, okay, that's great. That's awesome. But they are a little bit more safety related, and it just starts to like ease that into the mindset. And then that's going to start becoming part of the culture. Like you say, kind of becoming part of what everybody is like getting used to if it's not something that's already existing in your routine.
Are the safety regulations different, like the requirements different if you are a small business or you're running a larger operation? And not necessarily like a different type, but if you're a small home renovation contractor and you're doing bathroom renovations, that type of thing, and you're doing say $500,000 a year in revenue, versus a home building company that's maybe doing 10 million in revenue. You have a few more staff, but is the same, like, both companies need to be doing 50 kilometers an hour in a 50-kilometer zone? Is there, they still need to be tying off their ladders? Is there like a different point where all of a sudden now you're in a different category because your company has grown, where now certain safety aspects become much more important? Or have they always been important? They just haven't really been important to the business owner, to the company, because they haven't actually come up. Real quick before we get back to the show, if you have heard anything on this podcast that has resonated with you, or if it's helped you in any way, appreciate more than anything in the world if you could go hit that subscribe button or leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. I want to go back to being able to continue to serve and do more and more and help out and get bigger and bigger guests on, better and better. The only way that I can do that is with your help. I'm so honored to be here. Let's get back to the show. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a few layers to it. So, one thing that I'll say is if we take it back to kind of this like driving analogy, which I think works really well, is if I'm just a like regular person, I have my personal vehicle and I drive it versus like a company that has a fleet. The same rules of the road apply, right? We're not exempt. But because of it being a commercial fleet, there is some added checks and balances, right? So whether you have to do, vehicle inspections with the DOT, or you have to have like your vehicle haul weight on the side of your trucks, the training that you do for your staff, there is extra, but it's still ultimately to follow the same rules, and you carry the same liability, right? If I'm driving my personal vehicle and I get into an accident because my vehicle's not well maintained, that's my fault, just the same as it is if a company has a vehicle that's not maintained and it causes an incident. So it's a bit different because there's more checks and balances in place. Some of them in the safety world are voluntary, but the same rules still apply, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point, because if you have one company truck on the road that you've given an employee, then because that company truck, I mean, it's still the company's responsibility to keep that one vehicle maintained, which is easier to do. But if you have 10 company trucks, it's still the employer's responsibility to keep those vehicles maintained. Otherwise, it's going to be on them if something happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other piece to kind of like, is it different for smaller or larger companies, is you're always going to have that liability, which is the piece that we just talked about. And then the requirement is that like, who is kind of putting the pressure on, if that makes sense. So larger companies are going to have larger clients who have more, they've been exposed to some of this liability. They have optics that they need to take care of. There's more stakeholders at play. So those companies are going to push for, hey, you need to have this stuff in line. You need to give it to us and show us that you have a safety program, or we're going to follow up on you, or you have to meet these requirements. If you trickle that down to maybe a smaller contractor that's just going into residential homes, being hired directly from a homeowner, that homeowner has different priorities that are going to navigate who they pick and what they care about. So it's all still applicable, but it just really comes down to, the squeaky wheel gets the grease essentially. So what are they going to be caring about and putting the pressure on that matters.
You touch on a really good point, right? You said the clients have been exposed to potentially past litigation issues if it's a larger commercial project or a series of commercial projects, and they need to make sure that without a doubt it's written into the contract that this stuff happens. If it isn't happening, it's probably the contractor at fault versus the clients, but they'll navigate through their contracts however they need to. But for a homeowner that's hiring a contractor, are they at risk if the contractor is not performing safety regularly? If they get injured, I mean, that's most contractors that I know, they do carry some level of liability insurance, and it's mandated, whether it's going to be 2 million, 5 million, whatever that is. But how at risk are the homeowners if a contractor that you hire that's working on your home is not following these safety protocols?
Yeah, you do carry a level of risk. And so it's a bit gray of like how much and what would that look like. I mean, from a being a human being standpoint, like I wouldn't really want that on my conscience if somebody got hurt or injured at my house, right? And doing work for me. So I think there's that like human aspect of it. But there is a little bit of liability if like, someone is injured at your owned property, that you carry as what we would call, you'd essentially be the prime contractor. And so there's ways that we can navigate that. And I think it's not as scary as it might sound right now. It's very simple. What I always say to people hiring, like homeowners hiring contractors directly, is just ask them, what are you going to do to work safely? And is there anything I should be aware of that could put me at risk, right? And I think it's a very simple question. It's as simple as like, are you generating noise? Should I leave the house for the day? Are you generating dust? Like, do I need to be worried about that? If you're working off of the roof, what area do I need to avoid? Like, it's like kind of, it's safety questions, but it's almost like, what's the inconvenience of this? And so if you ask those questions, it's very like easy. It's not like, okay, well, I'm a homeowner and you need to submit your safety manual to me and your statistics. And like, it doesn't need to be like that. It's just very simple questions. And then I think it helps on that side of being a homeowner going, if I have 3 prices to choose from, 3 contractors, and I ask them all the same questions, and some of them go, okay, this is our plan. Yeah, it's going to be a bit noisy. Like, we'd recommend you leaving, or, this is where we'll drop our materials. Like, this is a safe area, versus a company that's like, don't worry about it. I'm like, oh, from like a quality perspective, which one do I kind of want to go lean towards anyway? So I think it's another way to sometimes choose who you're going to hire. But it doesn't need to be like, scary. Like, you don't need to comb through their procedures. Like, ultimately, we are trusting them. So it's as easy as like making sure they have a valid business license, maybe make sure they have liability insurance. So it's really easy to navigate the homeowners taking on that liability just with a few simple questions.
Yeah. Who is it that your company typically works with? Is it small businesses? Like, who do you target and find that needs the most help? That's somebody that's stuck in this trap of not knowing what they don't know, but really needs the help. Otherwise, the long-term benefits could be pretty brutal if things aren't shaped up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I work with a lot of small businesses. I would say I work all the way from owner operator, but I do have some that like range up to like 60 employees. And the small businesses is definitely a big part of what I do, because it's just harder for them to have somebody like with the dedicated knowledge. And they have people that can execute the safety stuff, like if I give them that guidance. But just having a dedicated role to take it on is really challenging. And it doesn't make sense in those smaller business settings, right? It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense for resources. But that's not to say that larger businesses don't need support. And what the reason is that they are often businesses that have been around for a while, but their hiring clients are changing those expectations. So they're getting that pressure. So it's not necessarily, is it small or large? It's just sort of like, who is their client? That's really the driving factor, is like who, when people are coming for support.
So why did you start Safety Comply? You kind of like touched on it as to how it started and kind of what you were all about, but you've you saw a need in the market somehow, and you just decided, you know what, I kind of have a skill. I'm gonna go serve this need. But what was the reason that drove you to start this company?
Yeah, like in the general contracting role, I was working with like bringing in our sub trades and making sure that they had their safety in line and that it met our requirements and they were following it. And when I go to site, yes, it was plain as day. I could see that they're wearing their PPE, they're operating safely. Like I felt very safe on site with them. I understood what they were doing. They would talk to me if I had questions. That was very clear. But when I needed that documentation piece from them, that's where the walls would go up.
Mm.
It's just like, we don't have that. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm a safe person, I swear. And I'm like, oh, I know that, but I need some documentation to back it up because of just how this world of safety and construction has evolved. And so when I saw that being the big barrier, it made sense because, like I say, you go on site and like their technical skills and knowledge is like beyond like what I could ever fathom understanding, right? When it comes to the people that build the buildings and put the things together in our society, like it's incredible, but they're very good at that and they're very good with their hands and that's their skill set and that's why they're in that role. So when I bring something in that's just not what they want to be doing or what they are skilled at, it just is like, it was disappointing to me that that would be a reason why they couldn't be successful. It just didn't make sense. So I wanted to, and even just like once I started helping people a little bit with it, kind of like, well, let me just give you a hand, and seeing if that would mitigate their stress and like physically seeing it. And they're like, oh, okay, like that's so great. Thank you so much. Like just physically seeing that relief of stress. I was like, oh, well, I could do this. Like this is so necessary because I need them to keep going. I need them to keep getting their job done. They work for contractors that work for the city or work for schools and they've got to keep going, but they were just running into that barrier and that stress and it's not necessary.
Well, I think by taking something that really is overwhelming to a lot of people, very much narrowing it down, putting it on their plate and saying, it's very, very simple. All you need to do is this. But back to that, you don't know what you don't know until you know
Mm-hmm.
thing. People don't know that, right? So it's sort of becomes a dirty term or this thing that they just want to close the door and hide from it and hope that
Yeah.
nothing happens and cross their fingers that nothing ever does. But it is in fact really quite simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I always try to reverse the perspective, right? Like I do understand there is extra stuff you have to do. There is paperwork, there is training, there is more. But rather than looking at it as a barrier or like it slows me down and it's inconvenient, it's like, well, what's the opportunities that it brings, right? So I've talked to a number of people, especially this year. It's like they need this now so they can get a new contract or they can win new clients or they can have a competitive advantage. And it's opening a lot of doors that are previously closed or becoming closed because the requirements are increasing. So they're missing out on a lot of opportunity. And when we have that conversation, it's a lot more exciting. It's a lot more like, okay, you have my attention now. Like, what do we got to do?
And also the opportunity of just delivering a great experience to your customers
Mhm.
that see this was like you can clearly, as people talk a lot, after you're gone, or people always ask, hey, how's the house build going, or how's the renovation coming along, and they don't want to tell their friends, you know what, I have a few concerns that these guys they don't really care about their staff, they don't really care about the
Mhm.
process, they don't really care about safety. Like that's not something that a conversation they want to be having had behind your back. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well to really showcase construction best practices. Even go one step right at the sales process. When you go and you're talking to a customer, bringing forward, here's all the things that we take to make sure that our staff are safe, to make sure that your home is safe, that we what we do to protect your home. And right off the bat, it it delivers a sense of comfort to those
Mhm.
customers. And if they feel comfortable with you, then they're going to have that trust that any decision that you're making throughout the process, you have their best intentions in mind, that those conversations are going to become easier, and you're probably going to generate more referrals. And who doesn't love more referrals?
100%. And I mean, I often say that like safety is a very commonly missed marketing opportunity. And I think it's because it's one that not a lot of people are thinking about and how
Mm.
that communicates your product and your service and your professionalism. But I also think it's one of those like silent marketing opportunities. It doesn't have to be like advertising and in your face and billboards and radio ads. It's just like by just implementing that stuff, it's like silent communication, what you see, and it goes a long way. Like it really does, because I think a lot of the times people don't have the confidence to tell the person or the service that they're unhappy or they're concerned, but they will talk about it with their friends and their
Mm.
family and other people, and it gets around like quite easily. A negative experience spreads like wildfire. So it's really, like I say, a bit of a marketing opportunity, and one that's available to you without having to develop an advertisement plan or pay somebody to do ads and brochures and all this stuff. It's something that's part of your operations, and it can happen naturally if you let it.
Well, and for your subcontractors as well, because if you are a general contractor like we
Hmm.
are on any given project, you're going to have 20 to 30 different companies that are going to be on board. And if they walk onto one job site and there's no signage up at all, and they're in there, they're going to feel like, this isn't really a professional company. So we're maybe not going to take them as seriously as we would if we walked in and they saw, and not only a site sign, but a site safety sign. And on the doors, there's a lockup procedure, and there's directions to the hospital and who to
Hmm.
contact in case of an emergency. And on the front door of a house, even if the neighbors around, right? Like we had an incident where uh one of our projects, there was a front door that was left open, and it was, in fact, there was somebody in the house, but the painters were upstairs and it was late and they were working, trying to get a project done, and the front door was open, and we had a neighbor that called us. It was like at 9 p.m.
Mm.
And the only reason why they had our contact information for the project manager was because there was a site sign on the door that gave the direct information, a direct line on who to call in case there were any incidents with the houses or with
Nice.
the house that was there. And so that alone, like when we received that phone call, that was a good opportunity to even speak with that customer. And if I mean, it's a very simple thing, but that was a great opportunity to even showcase to our clients. Yes, if this type of thing happens, we're putting these small little measures in place that make
Hmm.
them feel really comfortable about the rest of the process.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like that speaks volumes for that customer, that potential customer, or whoever they're going to talk to about it. And then that's the subcontractor side of it as well. Like you say, like being able to communicate to those guys coming outside that it's a professional environment, and like this is how things are put together. They run smoothly. They have the information and the resources that they need to be successful, even when things don't go well. It goes a long way, and then you're going to continue to attract that level of subcontractors to your business as well and retain them. I think, if anything that I'm like learning in this industry too, it's that eventually, like once you kind of gain traction in the trades and the project management side of things, you can be a little bit picky. You can be like, well, I don't enjoy working on those job sites. They're not run well, they're not safe, I don't feel like we're taken care of. And so maybe it's harder to retain those sub trades if you're not supporting them in every way you can.
Is there an example that you can give us in your history of doing this where that somebody, maybe a company that you're working with, has come across something, they ended up getting into pretty hot water, and if they had only followed some basic safety precautions, that it probably wouldn't have happened? I mean, I imagine you have a lot of experience and you hear a lot of stories, like something that could have been easily avoided. Do you have any stories that you could share with us?
Yeah, I always try to have to be careful because I want to be respectful of
Hey, you can
companies.
change
And
the names, you can
so
change
I
the
won't,
names,
yeah,
you can
I
change
definitely
some
don't name
dates.
names.
that's
So
all
like how
that's
can
all
I
good, but
one that
we
comes to
need to
mind
know.
was like it ended up like, I think something that I have been very fortunate is that I haven't had a very like severe outcomes, but potential is always there. And I think this is the more relatable route to go, because I find if we go like, oh, this person got hurt or this person almost died, or it's unfortunate, but it becomes a little bit like the Charlie Brown teacher. It's like your
Mm.
mom like telling you to be safe. But what really strikes a bone with people is when it's about you had to stop your job, you got interrupted, you got slowed down, the PM or the person on site was a pain and they were up your one side and down the other and it was annoying. That's when people are like, how could we prevent that? I just want things to go smoothly. And so ultimately what happened is there was a subtrade on site and what they were doing was generating a lot of dust and a lot of like it was causing issues with the ventilation and the air and the debris. And the dust that they were accumulating was non-friable, non-toxic, like it wasn't an irritant, but it was annoying and it made visibility poor and then it had to be cleaned, right? So it caused a lot of delay on the project and unforeseen costs to cleaning. And the result was if we had a little bit more planning on the front end of like, how are we going to contain the dust? How are we going to make that environment safe for the other trades operating around? It would have made a big difference. And if we took that even a few steps further backwards and saying, well, who hired this company? And when we hired them, what did we ask them? Did we get a safe work practice or even just like, hey, what's your operating procedure? It doesn't even have to be like safe work practice, but it's like, what's your steps? Like, how do you do this as a trade? And if we kind of have those conversations on the front end, A, we could have prevented the frustration. B, we could have reduced the cost of that impact. And C, we'd probably have subtrades that we would work with continually and all the way up to the client that got frustrated with that project. So I think a lot of the times it's even those just like job interruptions that really strike a chord with people because I think it's just something about the industry where it's like, I want to show up to work, I want to build the thing I'm supposed to build, and I want to look back and be like, great job, and go home at the end of the day and be done with it. And that's the nature of the work. That's one of the great things about it. You know, it's not something you can take home with you, so you can't.
Yeah.
When that gets interrupted, it causes a lot of frustration. So figuring out how to solve those problems is most common, honestly.
I think a lot of, I mean, I'm maybe speaking out of term here because we've been doing this for so long. I would hope and assume that contractors have some sort of process before they start a job about maybe transferring information and, you know, from whether it's going to be a sales position to an operations position, or it's going to be a foreman to an apprentice or whatever that looks like. But at some point you're going to be transferring the information, and something as simple as, per job where you just have even a 1-page pre-job safety checklist at the beginning of the job. It doesn't even necessarily need to be reviewed every single day, but even that, where here's the information, here's the scope of work, and here is all of the boxes that we've checked to make sure that things are done safely, whether it's going to be, water is shut off or power is shut off or the site signage is up, or, we've identified where we're going to park, and if we need any sort of flagging, even if you don't have to necessarily have a full traffic management plan because it's not necessarily relevant, but understanding like it's been identified and that information has been transferred, something small like that takes probably 10 minutes at the beginning of each project can certainly go a long way.
Absolutely. And especially when that project involves several trades, right? And I think the reason being is that in our trade, we get really used to what we do, and it's not something that we think much about. And that's where a term called imminent danger comes in. So if I'm an electrician, I'm really used to what I do. I work with hazardous energy. Yeah. I know what to do with it. I'm ticketed. I'm certified. But if I'm working next to a drywaller, that's not their scope of work. For them, what I do is imminent danger. And so if we have that checklist also sort of like per trade, that then allows us to gather the information that like everybody needs to know. Oh, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't schedule the drywaller or the electrician at the same time for obvious reasons. That's, maybe not the most relevant example, but those kinds of things, because that's going to be a disruption to their work and unsafe for them. So by getting that information from those different subtrades, that also really helps in that planning phase. And like you say, it really doesn't take a long time, and it doesn't need to be like onerous. It's just, what are the things you're doing? What are the hazards? How do we make sure it's safe for everybody?
You mentioned common sense. I don't know if we were talking about common sense on the podcast already, or if it was before we started the podcast outside of our conversation. Yeah. Record button. But common sense came up as a conversation. And at what point does, we're checking these boxes, we have these checklists. At what point does it kind of kick in where it's just, there needs to be some liability and common sense on a job site, and kind of back to your imminent danger, or what did you refer to it
Yeah,
as?
imminent
Imminent danger,
danger.
right? So,
Yeah.
the electrician understands that all the wires have power running to them and what not to do, but the drywaller, or the demolition contractor, for whatever reason, might not have that experience. So they might cut through a wire, might get shocked, whatever that looks like. But someone might say, well, you should have known, like, electrical has power in it. So why did you cut through that wire? That's common sense. We don't need to get that onto a checklist. But at what point does it become, just really understood that there's a certain level of common sense that has to happen versus, like, or are we trying to eliminate all common sense altogether and just process everything to do with safety, so that we have something to fall back on?
Yeah. I have to eliminate common sense from my vocabulary as like a reality. And if it was an applicable thing, like if it did work, I wouldn't have a job. And I would be happy if that was the case. But the issue with common sense is that common sense is a product of your experience. So if you haven't experienced it, you don't have that knowledge. And I think where common sense used to be practical, it used to work, is things weren't maybe as complicated, right? So like if you think of like building a building now versus, even a couple decades ago, or like it's just there's so much more that goes into it. The technology, the tools, the materials, the requirements, it's so much more complex, and so it's very challenging for everybody to have those experiences and build up that common sense.
Mm,
So there's kind of two things that we need to do is we need to remember that if someone hasn't experienced it, they're not going to know. And the second piece is, well, how do we validate that someone has experienced it, or give them that experience? And so that's where we bring in like some more safety practices, and that's where we work with training people and job shadowing and competency. But the reason why we can't rely on common sense is because if you haven't experienced it, you're just not going to have that knowledge. And so it sucks. It's tricky. It's frustrating as we kind of make some generational shifts in the workforce. But it's just the reality. It's just a very different dynamic in society than it used to be. So we have to accommodate for that.
Are you seeing a shift in the market? I mean, or in the marketplace and in the business space, where safety is becoming something that is viewed at as more important. What I mean is, like, I've worked with, when I got into construction, right? I was working on a large construction company at first, and there's a lot of guys that have been doing construction for a long time. Like, we're talking, like, these are the guys that are, they're old Eastern European guys that are, in the trades for 50 years, who are getting close to retirement. And they're like, I remember when I was climbing up telephone poles and wires and didn't have harnesses and all this stuff. And all this stuff is just nonsense. Like, why do we even do this? It doesn't do anything. But are we seeing a shift now with businesses starting to take this stuff more seriously, or has it, always been there? And there's maybe those guys that I was working with were just part of a generation that didn't really see the value in it.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing like the understanding for safety and the need for it is increasing. I think that the frustration is still there, and I think that you still have both, sides of that. You still have people that have been in the trades for, 50 years, and you still have new people. And so when I try to like have those conversations with, those individuals, it's like think of all of that you've learned over that time, right? Like think of you back on day one, and would you know what you know now? And the answer is definitely not. And
Mm.
yeah, you might have had to do some things and make mistakes and get hurt maybe even, or see somebody else get hurt. But if you could just pass some of that knowledge off rather than they have to figure it out on their own, we'd all be a lot better for it. And it would, like I think empowering people to be like, hey, you have a lot to give and you have a lot to offer. Like teach this person, show them what you do, how you do it safely, let them learn from your experiences. It's really beneficial. So
Uh,
you're seeing the value, you see it, but you just have to shift perspective sometimes.
I remember my first day on the construction site, and I was 17 and had, for the jumped onto this. It was a big commercial construction. I had no idea what I was doing. I like bought brand new boots and like a brand new tool pouch and a brand new hammer, and just for this new job that I had. Never, like, this is my first time. And I remember there was this guy, not to give the Eastern European folk, a bad reputation, but old dude, right? He was a concrete finisher, and I remember him. I remember seeing this guy. I don't remember his name, but he's there and he's sweeping up a room, right? It's full of concrete dust. He had just been grinding the floor. Supposed to, I'm assume at this time, right, wearing a respirator, and he's got a dust mask. He's sweeping up. He's got a dust mask half on the one side of his face. He's pushing the broom. I can barely see him, Elizabeth. I shit you not. Like, it was so dense, just full of dust, and he's
Yeah.
gripping a dart at the same
I
time.
was like, I know exactly what you're gonna say.
Yeah, and he's smoking a cigarette while he's just puffing away with like one hand, the darts hanging over his mouth. He's just sweeping up this dust is blowing everywhere, and I'm like, this is, to me, I was like, this is construction. This is exactly what I thought it was in my mind. Like,
Yeah.
this is what I got to do, I guess, to fit in. And
Hmm.
I found out pretty quickly that that wasn't in fact the case, but there was a blip in time where that was what construction was
Hmm.
for a lot of people, and that was kind of what they got into it. And then I started seeing guys wearing a lot of sweatpants, and I was like, I don't understand wearing sweatpants. Like, those things are really soft. Like, I get that they're maybe comfortable, but
Hmm.
on, like, in construction, is that something that is tolerable? But this was my introduction to construction slowly, and I realized pretty quickly, okay, like, these people, they're not going to last very long at this company. But I was just, it was so funny.
Yeah, you see it all. You see a very wide variety of interpretations of things, and what we think is okay and what we don't. And again, it's just like, did anybody tell them differently, or encourage, like, enforce it differently? I mean, the dart probably has more of a filter than the half of that mask was
Yeah.
gonna do anyways, I guess. I don't know. But it's just sometimes, like, just like, yeah, just a different experience, and like you say, you having that prolonged experience, you learn differently. But the first ones are very, very impressionable.
If you have a company that doesn't typically have a strong culture of safety in the company, and you've had guys that have been working for you or women that have been working with you for quite a while, and the emphasis has really been just on like production, customer service, but
Hmm.
safety is there's some bad habits that have seeped in, and that it's probably not great, but that's kind of the culture, and somebody wants to shift that, right? The business
Hmm.
owner wants to make this a safer place to work, wants to show that they do care about this, but it's kind of already integrated into their staff that some of this stuff doesn't really matter. How would somebody go about starting to shift that culture to a culture of safety, and we are taking this seriously versus not? Because, like I said, I look at that guy with the mask half off, ripping the cigarette and full of dust, and clearly not a pinnacle of health. To that guy, it's kind of tough to tell, hey, like, maybe you shouldn't do that. I know you've been doing
Hmm.
it for 40 years, but we're going to change that now. How do you get somebody like that on board with a new direction?
Yeah. You mentioned something really key in there, is that the business owner wanted to make that shift. So the first thing is it has to come from like the very top down.
Mm,
And it's a little bit, the way I explained it though, is it has to come from the top, but they have to start at the bottom, if that makes sense. So when I say that, I mean, like, they've got to be fully committed to it, whatever means necessary. And you start at the bottom by going, when that person goes on site, that business owner, that leader, they're wearing their PPE and they're stopping others that aren't. So
mm,
it's the top person has to do it, but at that, like, frontline level, and starting to show, like, I'm going to walk the walk as well. I'm not just going to sit in a meeting and tell you, you have to do this, you have to do that, you got to do this. I'm going to join you in the trenches, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to show you what I expect because I'm going to demonstrate it. And it doesn't have to be like getting people in trouble. It's just like showing them that you value them. If I get on site and that guy is, somebody's not wearing their PPE, they're wearing sweatpants, I'm going to say, "Hey man, you've got to go home and change. Like, that's not safe for you. And I don't want you to keep working without being safe." And so rather than being like, "You're in trouble, you're not doing this right, you can't keep going," it's like, we're all going to, like, be held to that same standard, and I don't want to let you move forward without what you need. Whether that's like, oh my gosh, you've got to get training before you can go on that lift. I'm not going to make you go on that lift until you have that operator training and I know that you are comfortable, safe, and you understand what you're doing. So it just really comes like it has to be the top down, but you got to start on the front lines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and starting with priorities, and I imagine starting small, like you don't.
This episode is sponsored by New Vision Projects, and everybody has heard the horror stories that happen. They have a friend of a friend or a neighbor that's been renovating for years on end, or they've been building a home and it just hasn't gone the way that it needed to go. Budgets are blown through the roof, timelines, forget about them. New Vision Projects has an incredibly strong track record for over 15 years of working with customers, serving them at the highest level. If you are considering building or renovating, check them out on Instagram at New Vision Projects or at newvisionprojects.com. Building the homes you want with the confidence you need. New Vision has you covered. Let them show you why they're different. Back to the show.
You don't necessarily need to jump in and say, everybody, this is our new safety plan. Read these 96 pages of this manual and study it like I've done while it's been written and just follow it, right? This is probably not good enough because we have processes that are pretty straightforward. And I know that processes that aren't followed and checked in on regularly are probably just going to end up words in a book, words on a file somewhere. They're not actually going to mean anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to that conversation of like, why did I start doing what I'm doing? Because I saw the barrier that's not their natural skill set. So giving someone procedures to read or policies or documents isn't going to be the best place to start because it's going to put the same barrier in place. It's going to be like, oh, I can see your head, so put your hard hat on. I can see your boots. And, also I can see that you're going to do this task and it's not safe. So just starting like really boots on the ground is the way it's going to go, but also trying not to like bite off more than they can all chew. We can't, only like one slice of pie at a time. So yes, everything is important. I will for sure say that, your daily hazards are important. Your equipment's important, your training, your emergency response, but you can't do all of that at one time. So let's just take one piece. Let's get really, really good at it and get everybody to understand. So that understanding piece is another thing I'll come back to, is not only does that owner need to be present or that leader need to be present, boots on the ground, but then communicate why we're doing this. Why are we making this shift, right? And there can be a variety of reasons. Just as long as you're transparent, that's going to be more. It could be somebody got hurt and we don't want that to happen, or we don't want anybody to get hurt. It could be, hey, we want to keep everybody employed and we're going to lose this contract if we don't have this stuff in place. Or we just want to stop the disruptions, that when we're not prepared, we're not ready. As long as we're upfront about it and people know why and there's a genuine reason and they're not just going, we're just checking boxes just to check boxes, they're going to get behind it, just being transparent.
So how does your process work, right? If somebody, let's call it, ABC Contracting, decides, all right, we need to hone in on our safety. It's a thing. We don't really know where to start. We maybe have a few documents, but it's not all that organized. I don't really know where to go, and they reach out to you. What does that process typically look like? What do you take them through? Where do you start? What is the end goal? Walk us through your process.
Yeah, so depending on their goal is obviously going to guide the process and what is a bigger hazard or a bigger risk for them or where they feel like they're falling short. But it's really not that groundbreaking. I would just start with your daily hazard assessment. The key piece that I find is a little bit what people don't expect is when you start with that versus a lot of times it's like, okay, we're going to write this manual and we're going to write all these policies and procedures. Like I can do that in the background, but if I can get you starting to fill out a form every day saying this is what we do, this is what's dangerous, and this is how we make it safe, then I also get some feedback from you, right? So I start to build that program, build your processes, build your stuff in the background because you're telling me what you do, but I'm doing it in a way that's not sit with me for several hours and tell me all the things that you do and we're just going to pick it apart, because I don't actually want to do that and people who work in the field don't want to do that. So giving them that small piece, and it's like very straightforward. We talk about how to do it. This is the form you need to fill out and this is why. And then taking that information and starting to create it into a safety program that's actually relevant to the work that they do on site. It's really critical.
Yeah, and arguably checklist plans with AI, right? Where whether it's Claude or GPT or Manus or something that, whatever you choose your LLM of choice. A lot of these checklists, they have been like, they're really easy to build pretty quickly,
Hmm.
right? It's
Yeah.
a safety checklist. The more difficult thing is the implementation of it, because anybody can, for $20 a month, can go in or choose a free program and probably put in some company information, have them spit out a checklist, and then it's like, all right, cool, we have that now sitting on our desk. But in case WorkSafe comes by or WCB comes by and checks it out, at least we have that. But the more difficult thing is really the implementation and the uh, what that looks like, the walking the walk,
Hmm.
not just talking the talk scenario. And I love what you said is the shift of the really the business owner or the key stakeholder that's in a leadership position that really wants to see this change, implementing that. And it's a culture thing. Like I had a when and it was just being louder about what's important, and in daily meetings having those conversations. I had we saw a lot of fast food at one point come through the office door, and to me that was not something that I thought was healthy. It isn't great for energy, it's not great for production. I feel like I don't want to see anybody get overweight. I pretty well eat the same thing every day. I exercise. Health fitness is important to me. But when I started getting louder about that, started getting louder about health and fitness, started getting louder about, showing my lunch that I'm bringing and why I'm doing this, and the weight that I've lost and the body fat percentage and all the things that I'm proud of, that the amount of fast food that's like kept coming through that door pretty well diminished to none, because
Hmm.
that there became an understanding that that's not valued by leadership. And maybe there's going to be a sense of judgment when they bring it through the door, whether there is or not. But all of a sudden that kind of stopped. And I love what you said about the implementation coming from the leadership. And I think that is a more of the difficult thing to do, is really implement it across home versus finding a checklist yourself for any sort of circumstance.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I really like what you say about getting louder. And that's a great example, is that your team is going to always follow you. So if you say something and do it differently, they're going to do as they see, not as they hear, if that makes sense. So it's a great example. And if you're the one, coming to site and like holding that piece accountable and emphasizing like, no, 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 like this is important enough for me to say this comes before the work, or the work doesn't happen if we don't have these things done, is critical, right? Because you could sit there in a meeting, you could send out a memo and say, yeah, we've got to do this. But if you show up on site and you go, hey, how's it going, Joe? And Joe's like, oh, it's good. But he walks away and he goes, I wasn't even wearing like my PPE, or I'm, doing something unsafe and boss didn't say anything. He's gonna be like, oh well, I guess we actually don't really care. And that's going to speak so much more. That's going to put you so many steps further back than being like, hey, great to see you, can you just like take a minute and make sure you have this taken care of before we move forward. It's incredibly impactful, and it's such a great example. You don't have to sit there and tell people stop eating that and don't do that, but like as you talk about the things that you value, it's just gonna, like you say, gravitate in that direction. And something else that you said is just sort of, the things that we're doing every day. It's like we're already starting the job off by getting to site and going, well, what are we doing today from an operations perspective? So that's another one of those opportunities for that habit stacking. Like, let's work as a group. We all stand there and we say, okay, this is what we have on the go today. These materials are coming in, and this is the tasks, and da 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 da. And here's the things that we need to do to be safe, and here's what we're going to do to make sure it's safe. Like if it's like, hey, this delivery is coming, and like when we unload it, we need all hands on deck because that's the safest way to do it instead of one person, right? Like that's still an operational conversation, but we start to bring in those safety elements to it, and that shows the value, and that's implementing that in a functional way.
I love it. If there was like a screaming message that you could put on a billboard somewhere that you wanted the world to know about what it is that you're doing, any sort of message, and you wanted to get that out just super loud, what would you leave them? What would you put on that billboard?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's so many things that come to mind that, I could go, but I think for really like what I'm doing is that, I just want people to know that there's like someone like you can get help with this, it doesn't all have to be on one person. It doesn't have to be scary and overwhelming. Like I'm here or there's people like me that can help make this load lighter so that you can get back to doing the things that you're good at and that you got into business to do. So I think, if you don't know, ask and ask for help would be kind of, it's widespread, goes across more than just safety, but it definitely would be good for people to know that.
I love it. There's always a number of resources. If you don't know how to do it, you can certainly find out who can do it, and that person is probably only a couple of texts away to help you out.
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
absolutely.
where can people find you if they want to connect and step up their safety game?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is safetycomply.ca. I'm also on LinkedIn. The company's on LinkedIn as well. So it's Elizabeth Lecerf and Safety Comply Services.
Love it. We will make sure to get that in the show notes. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming today and shedding some light on a very important topic. Really appreciate your time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And to all the listeners that are out there still with us, as always, I'm here rooting for you to win and stay safe. And until next time, cheers, rock and roll. Have a great day.